The M1 Abrams tank, a 70-ton beast of depleted uranium and steel, had died with a quiet sigh. Not the roar of an enemy missile or the concussive boom of a mine, but the pathetic whimper of a failed hydrostatic transmission. It sat now under the relentless Mojave sun, a monument to mechanical failure, its thermal signature a shimmering beacon in the vast beige expanse of the National Training Center. Around it, the air was thick with the smells of defeat, hot metal, scorched dust, and the cloying sweetness of leaking hydraulic fluid. The heat was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on the shoulders and stole the breath from the lungs. From his perch atop a command striker, Major Kent Vance surveyed the scene with an expression of profound disgust. Vance was a man forged in the crucible of Ranger School, a walking, talking embodiment of the 75th Ranger Regiment's ethos. He was a roaring bonfire of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed carved from granite and a voice calibrated to shatter complacency at 100 paces. He believed in violence of action, in overwhelming firepower, and in the simple, brutal arithmetic of force on force. He did not believe in subtleties, and he certainly did not believe in the ghost in the machine that had just neutered one of his lead combat elements. "Well," he boomed, his voice rolling over the 24 soldiers milling around the dead tank. They flinched, even though the question was directed at the small figure hunched over a diagnostic tablet tethered to the tank's engine block. "Is it a brick or can you fix it, sweetheart?" The figure did not look up. She was a compact woman, lost inside a set of oversized digital camouflage coveralls and a dusty boonie hat that hid her face in shadow. Her name was Anya Rostova, and she was listed on the exercise roster as a civilian contractor, a GS-12 diagnostic analyst from the Army's Tank Automotive and Armaments Command. To men like Vance, this translated to nerd or librarian, a necessary but ultimately peripheral cog in the great green machine. Her stillness was an affront to his kinetic world. While his men shifted their weight, wiping sweat from their brows and checking their weapons, she remained utterly motionless, save for the precise economical dance of her fingers across the tablet's screen. She was tracing the logic of the failure, not through the simplistic error codes that had popped up on the crew's console, but through the raw data streams pouring from 100 different sensors. She saw the engine's RPM, the minute fluctuations in hydraulic pressure, the temperature gradients across the transmission casing, the voltage spikes in the fire control system. To her, this wasn't a broken machine. It was a complex organism telling the story of its own demise. The data flowed into her, not as numbers but as a language, a symphony of mechanical distress she understood, with an intimacy that bordered on the supernatural. "Major," she said, her voice quiet and even, devoid of inflection. It was a stark contrast to his parade ground bellow, a sliver of cool steel in the oppressive heat. The primary fluid pump for the X11003B transmission suffered a catastrophic bearing failure. The subsequent pressure drop cascaded, causing the governor to seize. "It's not a field repair." Vance stared down at her. He hadn't understood half of the words she used, but he understood the finality. He hated it. It was a conclusion delivered without deference, a simple statement of fact that disrupted his battle plan. "English librarian, can my guys get this thing moving or not?" "No, Major," she repeated, still not looking at him. Her focus was absolute. She was already rerouting diagnostic power to check the integrity of the secondary systems, ensuring the failure hadn't corrupted the turret controls or the primary armament. Her job was not just to diagnose the problem, but to understand its every implication. This quiet dismissal, this utter lack of performative respect, was a lit match to Vance's short fuse. His world was built on a rigid hierarchy of command and presence. He was a Ranger Major. He commanded respect through sheer force of will. This woman, this civilian, was looking at a screen instead of him. She was denying him the deference he believed was his birthright. His men, his chorus of junior officers and NCOs were watching. They saw his authority being questioned not with a challenge, but with indifference. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snarled, leaping down from the striker. The dust puffed up around his boots. He strode toward her, his shadow falling over her small form. The air crackled with a new tension, a social friction far more potent than the static of the nearby radios. She did not react. Her fingers continued their silent work. A young lieutenant, one of Vance's protégés, shifted uncomfortably. He knew the major's temper. He had seen it unleashed on soldiers for less. Vance reached down, his patience utterly exhausted. He grabbed her arm, his fingers wrapping around the thin fabric of her coveralls, intending to physically turn her toward him. "I gave you an order, contractor." It was a mistake born of pure arrogance. The instant his fingers tightened on her bicep, the world seemed to slow down. For Anya Rostova, the cascade of data from the tank was replaced by a new, more primal input stream. She registered the pressure on her arm, the angle of his approach, his body weight shifting forward, the slight tremor of anger in his grip. Her brain processed it not as a threat, but as a simple physics problem, a vector of force to be redirected. She moved. It was not a violent or panicked reaction. It was a fluid, almost lazy unfolding of motion. Her left hand, the one not holding the tablet stylus, came up and pinned his hand to her arm. Simultaneously, she rose from her crouch, not straight up, but in a corkscrewing motion that used his own forward momentum against him. Her body flowed around his grip like water around a stone. She stepped inside his guard, her hip checking his, breaking his balance. Her right hand, still holding the stylus between two fingers, came up and gently tapped the pressure point where his jaw met his ear. There was no sound, no grunt of effort, just a sudden, shocking stillness. Major Kent Vance, the roaring bonfire of a man, the Ranger commander, went limp. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed into the dust like a sack of wet sand. He was out cold before his helmet hit the ground. Anya stood over him for a single silent beat. The stylus was still held delicately in her fingers. She looked down at the unconscious major, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she crouched back down, her attention returning to the diagnostic tablet as if nothing had happened. The symphony of the broken tank was waiting for her, and it was far more interesting than the static of the man on the ground. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the assembled soldiers. The desert wind seemed to hold its breath. 3,400 soldiers were spread across this sector of the training area, their comms nets suddenly abuzz with confused chatter from the witnesses. But here, around the dead Abrams, there was only shock. They had just witnessed something impossible. Their commander, a man who seemed to them a minor god of war, had been felled by a quiet woman with a pen. A Navy SEAL, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, who was attached to the unit as an observer, was the first to recover. Marcus was a man who lived in the world of quiet competence. He was lean and weathered, his face a roadmap of a dozen forgotten conflicts. He had seen bar fights and firefights, and he knew the language of violence better than most. What he had just seen was not a brawl. It was an equation being solved. He looked at the unconscious major, then at Rostova, who was now annotating a schematic on her screen. He saw the utter economy of her movement, the calm focus that had never wavered. He recognized it for what it was: mastery. A low, appreciative whistle escaped his lips, a sound of pure professional respect. The young lieutenant, his face pale, finally found his voice. "Ma'am, you just—" "His grip was compromising my ulnar nerve," Anya stated, her eyes still on the tablet. "It was affecting the fine motor control in my hand. I needed it to finish the diagnostic." She said it with the simple, detached clarity of a mechanic, explaining why a wrench was needed. It was not an apology or a boast. It was a statement of operational necessity. The incident sent a shockwave through the exercise command structure. The official report was a masterpiece of military understatement, but the unofficial story, the one that flew across encrypted chats and whispered conversations, was far more vivid. It was the story of the quiet librarian who had put the loud ranger to sleep. A crisis, however, has a way of overriding social drama. 24 hours later, a new problem emerged, one far more serious than a broken tank or a major's bruised ego. A prototype drone, the RQ-180 Ghost Raven, a stealthy high-altitude intelligence platform worth north of $200 million, had vanished. During a handoff between two satellite links, its command and control transponder had gone dark. It was now flying blind, a ghost in the sky, somewhere over the 1,500 square miles of restricted desert airspace. General Marcus Thorne, No relation to the SEAL chief, a coincidence that caused endless administrative confusion, was the director of the entire joint exercise. He was a man who carried the weight of 3 decades of service in his steady gaze. He was calm, perceptive, and valued competence above all else. He listened to the frantic reports from the Air Force liaisons, his expression a mask of cold granite. Losing the drone was bad. Losing it where it might drift into civilian airspace, or, worse, be recovered by a foreign intelligence service disguised as a lost tourist, was unthinkable. "Find my bird," he ordered, his voice a low rumble that commanded immediate absolute obedience. The task fell, by default, to the best trackers on the ground, Major Vance's Ranger Battalion. Vance himself, cleared by medics and nursing a throbbing headache and a profoundly wounded ego, saw it as a chance for redemption. He would find the damned drone. He would prove that the incident with the contractor was a fluke, a moment of distraction. He would reassert his dominance through sheer undeniable competence. He threw himself into the task with a furious energy. He deployed his best sniper teams to the highest peaks, their powerful optics scanning the empty blue sky. He had teams of specialists sweeping every known radio frequency, searching for the faintest whisper of a signal from the downed bird. He requisitioned high-altitude assets, demanding satellite sweeps with ground-penetrating radar. For 12 hours, the full might of the 75th Ranger Regiment's considerable tracking and reconnaissance capabilities was brought to bear on the problem. And they found nothing. The desert held its secrets close. The drone was designed for stealth, its radar cross-section was smaller than a hummingbird's, and its thermal signature was barely above the ambient temperature of the high-altitude air. Vance's methods were like trying to catch a whisper in a hurricane. His men were experts at tracking men on the ground, not ghosts in the sky. Vance grew more and more frustrated. He yelled at his comm sergeants. He berated his intelligence officers. He paced the floor of his tactical operations center like a caged wolf, his voice a constant angry roar over the radio nets. "Broaden the search pattern. Retask the satellite. I want eyes on every goddamn inch of this desert," he bellowed, his frustration mounting with every negative report. He was performing competence, but he was not achieving it. His failure was loud, public, and increasingly desperate. In a quiet, air-conditioned tent at the exercise's main command post, Anya Rostova was monitoring the search. She wasn't officially involved, but the Ghost Raven's sensor package contained several subsystems she had designed. She had access to the raw data feeds from every asset involved in the search. She watched Vance's frantic brute force approach and saw the fundamental flaw in his logic. He was looking for the drone. He should have been looking for its shadow. She watched him fail for another 2 hours, allowing the systemic weakness of his methodology to become undeniably apparent to everyone on the command net. Then, she picked up her datapad, walked out of her tent, and headed for the main command post. She found General Thorne standing over a massive holographic map of the training area, his face etched with concern. He was flanked by a dozen colonels and sergeants major, all of them offering suggestions that amounted to doing the same failed things, but faster and with more people. Anya walked quietly to the edge of the circle of authority. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her presence a small, silent question mark. It was the SEAL chief, Marcus, who noticed her first. He was standing near the general, and he saw her out of the corner of his eye. He recognized the same focused stillness he had seen by the broken tank. He gave the general a subtle nudge and a slight nod in her direction. General Thorne turned. His eyes, accustomed to scanning horizons for threats, settled on her. He saw not a low-level contractor, but an island of calm in a sea of rising panic. "You have something, Doctor?" he asked. His use of the title Doctor was quiet, almost a test. He had read her file after the incident with Vance. He knew who she was. Anya stepped forward. "General, Major Vance is hunting for a needle in a haystack. He's trying to see the object. He should be looking for the disturbance it creates in the environment." A ripple of skepticism went through the assembled officers. It sounded like esoteric nonsense. But General Thorne remained focused on her. "Explain." "The Ghost Raven's inertial dampeners and flight control surfaces create micro-vibrations in its fuselage," she said, her voice clear and precise. They're designed to be undetectable by conventional radar or acoustic sensors, but they emit a faint, chaotic electromagnetic field. It's garbage data to most systems. They're designed to filter it out. She paused, letting the information sink in. My field sensor array isn't designed to filter it out. It's designed to listen to it. I can't find the drone, but I can hear the echo it leaves in the ambient electromagnetic spectrum. I can't give you a precise grid coordinate, General, but I can give you a vector and a velocity. I can tell you where it's going to be. The silence in the command post was now one of stunned contemplation. What she was proposing was borderline science fiction. It was using a system no one had heard of to track an invisible object by listening to its echo. Major Vance's voice crackled over the command speaker, dripping with scorn. He had been monitoring the command channel. General, with all due respect, we don't have time for this civilian's ghost stories. My men are professionals. We will find this asset. General Thorne ignored him. His eyes never left Anya's. He saw no doubt in her, no arrogance, just certainty. It was the quiet confidence of a master craftsman who knew her tools intimately. He made a decision. It was a choice between the loud, demonstrated failure of the known and the quiet, theoretical promise of the unknown. Major Vance, the general said, his voice like a glacier calving into a frozen sea. You and your men will stand down. You will observe. Dr. Rostova, the floor is yours. Tell me what you need. Anya nodded once. I need a stable power source, and I need a clear line of sight to the eastern ridge, and I need everyone to be very, very quiet. They gave her the back of a flatbed truck on a small rise overlooking the vast empty basin where the drone was presumed to be. The spot would later be known as Rostova's Perch. Her equipment wasn't impressive. It consisted of 3 slender matte black poles, each topped with a complex-looking orb of wires and lenses. They were connected by thick cables to a ruggedized pelican case that hummed faintly. She worked alone, moving with an unhurried grace that was mesmerizing to watch. The audience was vast. The entire command staff, including General Thorne, was watching a live feed from a camera positioned a respectful distance away. And across the valley, Major Vance and his entire battalion of Rangers had been ordered to halt in place and observe. Over 3,000 soldiers were now focused on this single, quiet woman. The initial mood was one of deep skepticism, especially among Vance's men. They saw her simple setup and scoffed. They were used to billion-dollar satellites and aircraft bristling with sensors. This looked like a college science project. Anya began her work. She didn't just place her sensors, she tuned them to the desert itself. She took a baseline reading of the Earth's magnetic field, the solar radiation, the faint chatter of commercial radio waves bleeding in from 100 miles away. She was building a canvas of silence, a perfectly balanced picture of the normal electromagnetic environment. Only by knowing what normal looked like could she hope to spot the aberration, the ghost's faint signature. As she worked, the SEAL chief, Marcus, quietly approached the flatbed. He wasn't there to interfere, but to help. He had recognized the power connector she was trying to mate to the truck's generator. It was a non-standard naval fitting, something she must have scavenged for her prototype. He knew the truck's generator would produce dirty power, full of surges that could corrupt her sensitive readings. Without a word, he disappeared into his vehicle and returned with a heavy olive-drab box. It was a portable inertial dampener and power conditioner, standard kit for SEAL teams running sensitive electronics on small boats. He placed it on the flatbed, connected it to the generator, and ran a clean, conditioned line to her Pelican case. He gave her a single, knowing nod. Anya looked at him, then at the power conditioner. A flicker of something, surprise, gratitude, crossed her face for a bare instant. She nodded back. It was a silent conversation between two professionals, a moment of mutual respect that transcended rank and branch of service. He saw her mastery, and he provided the one tool she lacked to ensure its perfection. With clean power, her system came fully online. A holographic display shimmered into existence above the Pelican case, a swirling, three-dimensional cloud of colored light. It was a visual representation of the electromagnetic spectrum around them. To the onlookers watching the video feed, it was a beautiful, chaotic mess. To Anya, it was a sheet of music. She closed her eyes for a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. Her fingers moved to a small control panel, making minute adjustments. She wasn't looking for a spike or a signal. She was listening for a dissonance, a single note that was out of key with the desert's song. Major Vance watched the feed on a tablet in his command vehicle, a sneer plastered on his face. "What is this, a magic show?" he muttered to his sergeant major. "She's going to pull a rabbit out of her hat?" Then she found it. A tiny, flickering thread of cobalt blue deep within the swirling cloud of data. It was almost invisible, a pattern of interference so faint it was statistically insignificant to any normal sensor. But it was there. It was the ghost's echo. "I have it," she said, her voice patched directly into the command net. The words were calm, factual. On the holographic map in the command post, a single red vector line appeared. It started from the drone's last known position and sliced across 100 miles of empty desert. It wasn't a search box. It was a prediction. "It's flying a standard Lost Link protocol, a descending figure-8 pattern," Anya's voice explained. "But it's compensating for a 17-knot crosswind at 30,000 feet. Its battery is failing, causing a harmonic tremor in the port aileron. It will attempt a controlled crash landing when its altitude drops below 5,000 feet. Based on its current trajectory and descent rate, it will touch down at these coordinates in exactly 11 minutes and 40 seconds. A grid coordinate appeared on the holographic map. It was precise to 10 digits. The sheer, unbelievable specificity of her prediction sucked the air out of the command post. She hadn't just found the drone. She had given them its life story, its flight path, its mechanical problems, and its exact time of death. General Thorne's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Vance, you have your coordinates. You have a timeline. Go get my bird." For a moment, Vance was speechless. The coordinates were 60 miles away from where his forces were concentrated. It was an impossible distance to cover in 11 minutes. It was a test he was designed to fail, but then his training kicked in. He had a mission. "Airborne assets on me!" he roared into his radio, the sneer replaced with the frantic energy of a man trying to outrun his own humiliation. He designated a fast response team, 2 helicopters worth of his best rangers. They were airborne in minutes, hurtling across the desert toward the coordinates Anya had provided, a desperate high-stakes race against the clock. The entire command element watched the feed from the lead helicopter. The minutes ticked by. 10 minutes, 11 minutes. The landscape below was a featureless expanse of rock and sand. There was nothing there. 30 seconds to target, the pilot announced. Vance's voice, tight with anxiety, came over the net. "I don't see anything. This is a wild goose chase." 10 seconds, Anya's voice calmly stated over the same net. "Look to your 11 o'clock, low on the horizon." And then it happened. As if summoned from thin air, a sleek, dark shape appeared against the pale sky. It was the ghost raven, descending silently, its wings rocking slightly from the aileron tremor she had predicted. It slid through the air like a phantom, its belly scraping against the desert floor in a shower of sand and dust, not 300 yards from the helicopter's nose. It skidded to a halt, exactly on the 10-digit grid coordinate she had given them. The world broke. The command net, which had been a cacophony of frantic chatter, fell into a deep, profound silence. 3,400 soldiers, from the lowest private to the commanding general, had just witnessed a miracle. They had watched a woman with a strange machine listen to the wind and pull an invisible $200 million ghost out of the sky. It was an act of technical wizardry so complete, so far beyond their understanding, that it felt like magic. In his command vehicle, 60 miles away, Major Kent Vance lowered his binoculars. His face was slack with disbelief. The sneer was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant expression. He had thrown the full might of his training, his experience, and his battalion at the problem, and had failed. She had succeeded with 3 poles, a box, and an understanding of a world he didn't even know existed. His entire worldview, a structure built on the primacy of physical strength and aggressive action, had just been leveled. General Thorne stood in the command post, staring at the screen showing the secured drone, Rangers forming a perimeter around it. He didn't say a word for a full minute. He let the silence stretch, letting the magnitude of the event settle into the minds of every person under his command. He had orchestrated this public test, given both Vance and Rostova the stage, and the result was more spectacular than he could have imagined. Then he turned, his boots making a soft sound on the metal floor. He walked past the colonels and sergeants major, his gaze fixed. He walked right past the SEAL chief, who gave him a subtle, approving nod. He walked out of the command post and into the blinding sunlight, heading directly for Rostova's perch. Anya was already packing her equipment. The problem was solved and her work was done. The holographic display had been powered down. The sensors were being stowed in their cases. She worked with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed all day, her mind already moving on to the next data set, the next puzzle. She was indifferent to the shockwave she had just sent through the entire institution. General Thorne stopped at the edge of the flatbed. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched her, this unassuming woman who had just demonstrated a level of mastery that redefined the modern battlefield. Major Vance and his entire command staff had been ordered to the location, and they were arriving now, a convoy of dusty vehicles parking a respectful distance away. They stood in a loose, humbled formation, a gallery of the defeated. Finally, the general spoke, his voice carrying across the quiet desert without effort. He wasn't speaking to Anya. He was speaking to the assembled rangers, to his staff, and to every soldier listening on the command net. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice cold and clear, "for the last 24 hours, you have witnessed two distinct approaches to a problem. You witnessed the approach of volume, of ego, of brute force, an approach that resulted in loud, comprehensive failure." He paused, letting the words hang in the hot, still air. Every eye was on him, but he was looking directly at the pale, shattered face of Major Vance. "Then," the general continued, "you witnessed the approach of quiet competence, of precision, of a discipline so profound it appears effortless. You saw a master at work." He turned his attention to Anya, who had just finished securing the last latch on her Pelican case. "This is not Contractor Rostova," he announced, his voice rising in authority, becoming a formal declaration. "This is Dr. Anya Rostova. She holds a Ph.D. in signal processing and quantum physics from MIT. The sensor array she just used to save our $200 million asset, she designed and built it herself, in her garage, because the official program of record was, in her words, insufficiently elegant." A murmur went through the crowd of soldiers. They were beginning to understand. "Dr. Rostova," the general went on, "is the lead architect of the Army's entire next-generation battlespace awareness network. The very systems Major Vance was attempting to use yesterday, the ones he blamed for his failure, were born from her research. She wrote the book. And most of you haven't even read the first chapter." He took a step closer, his tone becoming more personal, laced with the gravitas of a war story about to be told. 6 years ago, in the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan, a flight of A-10s was about to drop 500-pound bombs on what they thought was an enemy position. Their target was a ghost signal, a radio echo that had every analyst in theater convinced. But one person, a junior analyst tucked away in a SCIF at Bagram, said they were wrong. She saw a dissonance in the data, a harmonic that didn't belong. She argued, pleaded, and finally violated protocol and sent a check fire command directly to the pilots, a move that should have earned her a court-martial. He let the silence hang again, the drama building. Those pilots listened. The bombs were never dropped. 2 hours later, a Green Beret ODA, wounded and with their comms down, walked out of that same position. Dr. Rostova hadn't seen a ghost signal. She had heard the faint, distorted feedback from the radio of a wounded American sergeant. She didn't just save a dozen lives that day. She taught us that the nature of warfare had changed, that the new high ground wasn't a hill, it was the electromagnetic spectrum. The story landed with the force of a physical blow. The soldiers looked at Anya with a new kind of vision, a mixture of awe and reverence. She was not just a technician, she was a legend, a ghost hunter, a quiet guardian who fought with weapons they couldn't comprehend. Having laid the foundation, General Thorne turned his cold prosecutorial gaze back to Major Vance. The reckoning had come. "Yes, Major Vance," he said, his voice dropping back to its icy, surgical precision. "You are a graduate of the United States Military Academy. You wear the Ranger tab. You are entrusted with the command of this nation's finest soldiers. And yesterday, You put your hands on a civilian expert in anger because your ego was bruised. You chose arrogance over curiosity. You chose volume over listening. You have demonstrated in the most public and spectacular way imaginable that you lack the single most important quality of a leader: judgment. Vance stood ramrod straight, but his face was ashen. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "As of this moment," General Thorne declared, his words hitting like hammer blows, "you are relieved of your command. Lieutenant Colonel Harris will take charge of the battalion. You will report to my aide, who will arrange for your immediate transfer back to Fort Benning to await reassignment. Your career as a commander of men is over. We do not have room for loud, brittle fools in the modern army. We need quiet professionals. Dismissed." Major Vance did not speak. He couldn't. He simply executed a shaky salute, turned and walked toward a waiting Humvee, a man publicly and professionally broken. His swagger was gone, replaced by the slow, heavy shuffle of a man carrying an immense new weight. The chorus of his followers watched him go, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. The god had fallen. Then came the final act, the one that would cement the entire event into the institutional memory of the Army. General Marcus Thorne, the 4-star commander, the combat veteran of 3 wars, turned to face Dr. Anya Rostova. She had her pack slung over her shoulder and was about to leave, her work here finished. He took one step forward, drew himself up to his full height, and rendered the sharpest, most perfect hand salute he had executed in his entire career. It was a gesture of profound, shocking significance. A 4-star general does not salute a civilian. But he was not saluting a contractor. He was saluting a master. He was saluting a fellow warrior, one whose battlefield was invisible but no less deadly. It was the ultimate act of institutional validation, a formal public acknowledgement from the old guard to the new, a bow of respect from the establishment to true, undeniable competence. Anya, for the first time, seemed momentarily thrown. She looked at the saluting general, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Then she simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Behind the general, a sound like a rushing wind began to build. It started with the SEAL chief, Marcus, who snapped to attention and rendered his own salute. Then the colonels, the sergeants major. And then, like a wave rolling across the desert floor, every single ranger, all 3,000 of them spread across the valley, rose to their feet. 3,000 hands came up in a single unified gesture of respect. They saluted the quiet librarian who had humbled their commander and shown them a new kind of strength. The story of that day became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in every chow hall and training academy. Rostova's Perch became an official landmark on the NTC maps, a required stop for visiting commanders. A single, scorched piece of the Ghost Raven's fuselage, recovered from the crash site, was mounted in a display case at the Ranger School headquarters at Fort Benning. Below it, a simple brass plaque read, "Loud is not strong. Quiet is not weak. Listen." Kent Vance was reassigned to a dreary Pentagon cubicle, tasked with reviewing procurement contracts. The fire in him was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet shame. For 6 months he did his work, spoke to no one, and went home. But the lesson of the desert had been branded into his soul. He started reading. He read Rostova's published papers. He studied signal theory. He began to see the world not as a space to be dominated, but as a system to be understood. A year later, he formally petitioned to attend a graduate-level course on advanced sensor theory at the Naval Postgraduate School. The primary instructor, listed on the syllabus, was a visiting civilian professor, Dr. Anya Rostova. He attended, sitting in the back of the class, never speaking unless spoken to. He became her best student. He learned to listen. Years later, Colonel Kent Vance, a thoughtful, quiet, and deeply respected military strategist, would use his own spectacular failure at NTC as the primary case study when teaching young officers about the nature of modern leadership. He became the most fervent evangelist for the lesson she had taught him. And Anya Rostova? She remained indifferent to her own legend. The salute, the adulation, the mythologizing, it was all just noise to her, data to be filtered out. She continued her work, a quiet professional moving through the shadows of the military-industrial complex. She appeared on dusty FOBs in Syria and in sterile labs in Virginia, always upgrading systems, solving impossible problems, and mentoring the few young soldiers and officers who were quiet enough to listen. Her true legacy was not the single dramatic event in the Mojave Desert. It was the slow, steady cultural change she inspired, the gradual shift from an army that valued loud arrogance to one that revered quiet competence. She wasn't building weapons. She was building a smarter, more thoughtful, and more effective fighting force. One puzzle, one soldier, one quiet lesson at a time.